What's up, movie nerds and basketball geeks? Welcome back to Movie Ball. Wow, that is so much better than hey fuckers. Today's segment will be a basketball episode, so if you're here for the movie talk, you can just fuck right off. I mean, don't. Ideally, if you like the content, stick around, but, if you don't, that's fine. Like, comment, subscribe. You saw it in the title. Today's episode is all about the newly released NBA All-Decade teams. I'm really excited to talk about this. People have been blowing me up, asking me to do it. I don't have any fan requests yet. I don't even have any fans yet. So basically, when it comes to the All-Decade teams, how do we go about breaking down and deciphering which players belong where? And it's not as easy as you might think, although it probably is in retrospect if you just think about it and just think which players of the 2010s were the most impactful. They belong on these roster spots, and bada bing, bada boom, bada fuck. Ooh, I didn't like that. We're cutting that. But I like to make things complicated, and so does the NBA, apparently, because the All-Decade teams kind of differ from the All-NBA regular teams in that the All-Decade teams seem to have eliminated the idea that there needs to be a center spot fulfilled on the team. Regular All-NBA teams have always had a center spot that was needed. This would kind of be a nuisance to a lot of people because a lot of people felt, why not just have a third forward spot for a forward that probably deserved it over a must-be center? But that's not the case with the All-Decade teams, and it seems to be just the top 15 players in the league, except, hold up, it's not that. It still seems to want to have a 2-guard maximum per team, which doesn't really make sense to me. If you're going to eliminate the whole center thing, but still keep only 2 guards per team, and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I mean, who gives a shit? But I just think they should be a little more consistent with the rules. But also, all NBA teams are basically how good and how valuable you were to your team in that specific year. All-Decade teams are basically a compiled list of accolades and awards that players have won over the past 10 years. So, someone like Goran Dragic, he was an All-NBA third-team selection. If anyone can believe that, 2014. And not that he's a bad player, but I mean, he wasn't even an all-star before. He was, but that was years later. Fuck! So it's just that in making an all-NBA team, it could be, honestly, a lot harder than making an all-decade team because your all-NBA team selection is based on 1 year of a resume. What did you do in this 1 year that allows you to make this team? Whereas the all-decade team, you have a lot to work with. You have a lot of awards and accolades, MVPs, championships, all-star selections, defensive player selections, all these types of things play into what could help you make a team. And all these accolades and awards and selections and all that shit, it's all very important and crucial to making one of these teams, but they're not the only things that count. We simply can't count out stats, consistency, and impact over these past 10 years. Those are very key elements in making an all-decade team. First, let's start with some honorable mentions that are pretty controversial because one of these players may have been on one of the original roster spots, and they also may have been on the first team, and they also just won the MVP 2 months ago. Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek Freak, is an amazing player. We all know that, and some of you probably want to take your hand and slap me across the fucking face. You can't reach through the camera, but you wish you could. Imagine if you could. I'd be getting slapped so hard right now. We all know he's an incredible player, but I think that the NBA, the media, and all of us, honestly, are kind of riding high on his recent success. Giannis is an MVP. Okay, that's a huge step up. That's a huge bonus. But he's basically only been successful and a very good player over the past 3 or 4 years, and sorry to break it to you guys, an all-decade team is 10 years worth of accolades. He doesn't deserve a spot on the 2010s all-decade list. And of course, as I said, his recent success has been amazing, but this is just Giannis basically preparing the world and telling us, hey, I'm going to be on the first team when it comes to the 2020 decade list. The next honorable mention I want to mention is LaMarcus Aldridge, another person I have left off of the original roster. He is always going to give you about 20 points, 9 or 10 rebounds, and there's a reason he was on the all-decade team, and I'm surprised that he even made it. He made the third team. I was surprised that people even recognized him, but I just don't think he has enough postseason success or individual accolades and awards to warrant his spot on the team. The next player on this list is Chris Bosh, who people just seem to be forgetting about. I mean, we can't ignore the fact that he won 2 championships and was selected to 7 All-Star teams in this decade. Of course, he wouldn't really have those championships without D. Wade and LeBron leading the way and forming one of the biggest super teams of all time, but he was a crucial part of those wins. I'm leaving him out because his stats don't really jump out enough to warrant a spot on the list, but he's definitely worth the suggestion. Next up, we have Klay Thompson, who rightfully was left off of these all-decade teams, but he definitely has to be mentioned because he was obviously a pivotal role in the Warriors' success over the past 5 years. He has 3 championships, 5 All-Star selections, 2 All-NBA selections, and even a defensive team selection. He just doesn't really have a complete all-around game that these superstar, like mega high-caliber 2010s guards have. He doesn't really have that game, but he's going to give you the points. I mean, this man dropped 37 points in a quarter, 60 points in 29 minutes, and what was it, like 5 billion points in 2 dribbles? Like, he plays basketball. And last but certainly not least, the player that completes my honorable mention all-decade team will be Tim Duncan, who, much like Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, and a lot of these other 2000s era legends, his game started to kind of fizzle out in the 2010s, but not really. I mean, this is Tim Duncan we're talking about. He still averaged about 14.5 points, over 9 rebounds a game. He was still dominant defensively. He played both sides of the floor. That's what Tim Duncan does. He's a Spurs legend, and, he's got that ring in the 2010s, but unfortunately, his legacy was mostly cemented in the 2010s, or I'm sorry, in the 2000s when he won 2 MVPs and he just was absolutely dominating and when you look at the stats, I mean, his numbers were insane. And, yeah. So filling out my NBA All-Decade third roster, we have Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, Kawhi Leonard, Draymond Green, and Dwight Howard. I know it's pretty controversial, and I know what you're thinking. What the fuck? Like, that's all it is, just a big what the fuck. Dwight Howard over Giannis? Really? I think I just convinced myself. Who's flushing up there? I have to go really bad, actually. It's only about 16 points, 12 rebounds, not even 2 assists. 5-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 3-time All-Defense, blocks leader, 3-time rebounds leader. Yeah, Giannis is a better player than Dwight and will be a better player when it's all said and done and will probably win another MVP and maybe even a couple of championships along the way. But as far as a 2010s player, I have to go with Dwight Howard. We can't forget that he was the best center in the league for a long time. And I know half of that was in the 2000s, but the other half was in the 2010s. I think much like the recent success of Giannis, we kind of blame the recent struggles of Dwight, and that catapults our perception of him. He was the best center in the league for half of the 2010s. He was absolutely dominant, and just fuck. He just had such an impact that it's pretty hard for me to ignore. Yeah, he had some pretty pathetic and less than notable seasons in recent memory, but I think the first half of the decade kind of evens it out. I think I made a pretty compelling argument. Next up, we have Draymond Green, and it's another controversial pick, but I really don't think it should be. Much like Klay Thompson, he was a huge part of the Warriors dynasty, and I think he deserves to be recognized for that. He's a 3-time champion, Defensive Player of the Year, multiple-time All-Star, and multiple-time Defensive Player selection. I mean, I think his accolades speak for themselves, and I think they more than justify his reasons for being on my list. Yes, he wasn't hugely involved in the entire decade. He wasn't involved in every year of the 2010s, but he was involved in the past 5 years, which is half of the decade, and that's more than Kawhi Leonard, really. He just won the championship in Toronto. I understand he's one of the best players in the league right now, but we're talking about the decade, and we have to keep remembering that and coming back to that throughout this video. Similar to Giannis, he hasn't done much this decade. Yes, he just won the championship, like I said, in Toronto, which was amazing, and he's a two-time champion, two-time Finals MVP, two-time Defensive Player of the Year, three-time All-Star, three-time All-NBA. Okay, I get it, the list goes on, but he really only became a superstar in 2016 or 17, which is at best 3 years ago, and his numbers aren't exactly riveting for the decade at about 17 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists. Those aren't exactly superstar numbers, and I know he's a superstar now, but that's my reasoning for him not being on a higher-seeded team. He's still on my list. He's a fucking god in Toronto. What he did and ending the decade on that note, he obviously deserves a spot on this list. Then lastly, we have Kobe and Wade, who are pretty self-explanatory. Maybe the 2000s were their highest level of success, but the 2010s were no joke to them. I mean, they both won championships. They both had all NBA selections, all-star appearances, even though 2 or 3 of Kobe's were made no sense. He was injured! Like I said, they're all-decade talent for sure, but they're just not impactful enough in this decade alone to warrant a higher spot for the second or first team, because there are so many good guards, and it was a challenge. Before we move on to the second team, let me take a nice big sip of this ice-cold, refreshing Sunny D. Taste the power of the sun. Is that what they say? Is that their slogan? Is that Capri Sun? Does it taste the power of the D? It's literally not an advertisement. Filling out the second team roster, we have Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Carmelo Anthony, and Blake Griffin. Look at that. We have the Thunder Big Three Dynasty. CP and Westbrook are obvious locks. It just depends where you want to put them. I really wouldn't try to argue with you if you wanted to put Westbrook on the first team. I mean, he's an MVP, an 8-time All-Star, 8-time All-NBA, 2-time assist leader, 2-time scoring champ, 3 consecutive years averaging a triple-double. I mean, yes, he doesn't have any postseason success, but it doesn't really matter when you're this good for this long. And the same goes for Chris Paul. He doesn't have any postseason success, and he's often ridiculed for it, but for the first half of the 2010s, he was the best point guard in the league, and he was widely recognized as the best point guard in the league for a long time. He's not only got 7 All-Stars and 6 All-NBA selections, but 7 All-Defensive Team selections, and 2 times he led the league in steals. As for the 2010s, he's the second best point guard of the decade because I think his prime was a lot more impactful than Russell Westbrook's prime. I moved Paul George up to the second team from the third team, mainly because he's been pretty consistent throughout the entire decade. He's averaging over 20 points per game for what seems like a long time, and he only seems to be getting better each year. 6 All-Stars, 5 All-NBA selections, 4 All-Defensive selections, and very steady scoring numbers. I think he's more stable than, say, a Kawhi Leonard just because of what he's done for the majority of the decade. But now they're teaming up, so that's a yikers. Next up is Melo, who's literally one of my favorite players of all time, and I don't really appreciate the slander he's been getting recently. I get it's pretty funny to call him a scrub because he's had some pretty ass seasons the past couple of years, and they've been pretty lackluster, yes, but are we forgetting this is Melo, who was balling out for most of the 2010s? Yes, he was amazing in 2000s. On the Nuggets, he was incredible, but he was equally impressive on the Knicks in the 2010s, who was a sight to behold for most of his time there. 8 All-Stars and 3 All-NBA selections are pretty insignificant when you don't have anything else for the decade, but he still averaged over 24 points per game for the past 10 years and was even a scoring leader. He also legendarily dropped 62 points in the Garden. I'm a Knicks fan, so whatever I say is not credible. Last up on the second team is Blake Griffin, who, much like CP and Westbrook, was fittingly recognized on the All-Decade second team. Firing out of the gate, this man became Rookie of the Year with 6 All-Star selections, and he also sported 5 All-NBA teams. So, I mean, I understand that he was injury-prone, very injury-prone, and he may lack the postseason success that others have, but when this man was on TV, it was must-watch television. The Clippers, you had to turn them on. His dunking and high-flying power, it was just incredible. It was a sight to behold, and it was just such a cultural impact for the 2010s that it's just something you can't forget, and it's something you have to talk about. He also has a complete all-around game, which He didn't at first. He became a great player, and he was already a good player, and he was just getting better and better. He knows how to distribute the ball. He can obviously rebound. He makes the right plays. He's a great scorer. This is what all-decade talent is about. And for the first team, I really didn't know who to choose. I'm kidding. LeBron James, Steph Curry, James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Anthony Davis. Davis might be the only oddball out of this group of players because, unlike the other four, he was only selected to the second team. But I placed him higher because I just feel he's had a greater impact, personally, than the other forwards have throughout the decade. I just think that, even without an MVP and a championship, he's a 6-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA, 3-time Defensive Player Selection, 3-time blocks leader. I mean, these are great stats and consistent stats. As for everyone else, let's see if I can rattle off their awards real quick. Steph Curry, 2-time MVP, 3-time champion, 50-40-90 club, fucking 5,000-time All-Star, 5,000-time All-NBA, best shooter of all time, the best point guard of the 2010s, best point guard of the decade. I mean, you got to be on there. James Harden, best shooting guard of the decade, MVP. This is an argument that could be used for essentially any player that's had a very good season and was gypped out of an MVP, especially with LeBron, because he's in it every year. But literally the past 4 or 5 years, James Harden could potentially be a 4-time All-Star right now. He won in 2018. He could have just beaten out Giannis. He could have won in 2017 when Westbrook won because he also averaged an insane, crazy amount of numbers and just, that was, oh my God, 5 billion time All-Star. He averaged 36 points per game this past year. He is a great player. His legacy, his stats, his impact are a huge part of the 2010s. Kevin Durant, it goes without saying, I do think that his rings are cheapened, but he's still a champion, 2-time Finals MVP, one of the greatest scorers of all time, one of the greatest players of all time. There's no need to say anything. LeBron James, I do believe that I made the selections for me, and everyone's got their own selections. Like I said, the decade teams, it's harder to kind of figure out than a regular All-NBA team because it's about so much more, and it kind of depends on what you consider to be the most important aspect. That's the whole thing in the whole, greatest player of all time debate. Hope you guys enjoyed it. That's the video. If you want to see more videos like this, let me know. That's such a YouTuber thing to say, but, if you want to see, what I would rank for the 2000s all-decade team, I can go back and do that, or maybe even make a prediction video for who would be the 2020s all-decade players. Smash that like button. What you gotta do is smash it. If it was a character in Super Smash Bros., what you would do is you would not play as the like button. Select your main. You gotta select your main character, whether that's Donkey Kong, Kirby. If you like the Wii Fit Trainer, you gotta select whoever's your best. And you're gonna put that CPU for the like button. You're gonna put it down to 1. Put that bitch on 99 stock and just fucking fucking knock that bitch out. Fucking put it starting at a fucking 150%. Fucking blam, get the fucking baseball bat. Blam, get the fucking sword. Blam. It's really warm now. It's been sitting out for quite some time.